In WWE, they love to sell you the slogan, "Go Shine," but behind the lights sits a darker truth most people would rather not name, a bullying culture. Not a chair shot on the mat. This is the stuff that happens when the cameras aren't rolling. Backstage insults. Public shaming. Little intimidation games that basically say, play nice, know your place, and you'll be allowed to exist. And sometimes, a system that stays quiet long enough for it all to keep going. Some people can swallow it. Others get ground down until leaving is the only way they can save themselves. Today, wrestling sphere is going back through stories like that. Direct, cold, and uncomfortably real, wrestling sphere go. Number 13. Sable. If the Attitude Era was WWE burning at full blast, bold, reckless, no limits, then Sable was one of the biggest detonators of that whole era. She wasn't just famous. She was a phenomenon. The kind of presence where the crowd reacted before she even did anything, the media instantly latched on, and the company understood exactly what they had. Someone who could pull the spotlight of an entire time period toward her. In 1999, Sable became the first woman in WWE history to pose for Playboy, and it wasn't just a headline, it was a commercial explosion. That issue became one of the best-selling releases in the magazine's entire publishing run. When wrestling was truly hot, Sable sat right at the center of that crossover between sports entertainment and pop culture, and she owned it. But behind the glow, nothing about the story was pretty. Later that year, Sable suddenly left WWE, and this wasn't a take time off and maybe return situation. It was a hard break that made the entire industry look up. She filed a lawsuit against WWE, seeking $110 million in damages. In that filing, Sable alleged sexual harassment and unsafe working conditions. That's not something you package into two cute words like backstage drama. That's the ugliest part of the business. Power, people looking the other way, and the way some treat a woman's boundaries like they're optional, like they can be pushed, tested, and crossed whenever it benefits someone higher up. Some of the details she described were the kind that make your stomach tighten. Sable claimed male wrestlers were spying on the women in the locker room, not just accidentally walking in at the worst moment, but through uglier tactics. She alleged there were cases where holes were cut into walls so people could peek through. And then there was another layer. Sable said she was repeatedly pressured to appear topless on TV, like her body wasn't her own, just a prop somebody felt entitled to use for ratings. And if you think that's already low, the story drops further into pure humiliation. X-Pac admitted he once put feces in Sable's bag. Not a harmless prank. Not some misunderstanding. A deliberate act meant to degrade a person, just to prove who could dirty someone else and walk away without consequences. That's why Sable belongs on this list. She didn't leave WWE just because of timing, opportunity, or contract talk. She left while staring down a backstage culture where your fame doesn't always protect you. Sometimes it only makes you a bigger target. Number 12. Mauro Ranallo. If you want to understand how bullying in wrestling can destroy someone, you don't always need blood, barbed wire, or steel chairs. Sometimes all it takes is a microphone, and one person who thinks their status gives them permission to do anything. Mauro Ranallo is one of the clearest examples. That March, he stepped away from his SmackDown commentary role after symptoms connected to bipolar disorder flared up. Ranallo never hid that fight. He openly talked about living with it for most of his life. And anyone who actually understands mental illness knows this isn't like a bruise that fades. It's the kind of spiral that can drag you to the floor in days. Then came the part that made the situation even uglier than, he's out for health reasons. Reports spread that Ranallo had allegedly endured repeated harassment from JBL, and that the pressure was believed to have contributed to his relapse. This wasn't playful on-air banter for laughs. JBL was named as someone accused of toxic behavior both on camera and behind it, the kind of violence that doesn't leave marks on skin, but still eats at you piece by piece. And the breaking point was almost absurd in how petty it was. Ranallo simply acknowledged winning Best Television Announcer at the Wrestling Observer Newsletter Awards. A moment that should have been nothing more than professional appreciation. But JBL reportedly turned it into a reason to publicly come at him, as if Ranallo had committed some offense just for being proud of his work. The outcome was the kind you see in environments that protect power. Ranallo took an extended break to protect himself, while the person accused of applying that pressure stayed right where he was. It sounds insane. But in places where authority gets to decide what's normal, insane becomes routine. Thankfully, it didn't end with silence. Ranallo later returned in a lighter, lower-pressure role on NXT, still doing what he loves, but with less weight designed to crush him all over again. Number 11. The British Bulldog and Jim Neidhart. If the Montreal Screwjob is a scar in WWF history, then for the British Bulldog and Jim Anvil Neidhart, it was also the moment they learned a brutal truth. In this game, a promise can be nothing more than a prop. The setup is well known. Bret Hart was about to leave WWF for WCW, but he was still the champion. Vince McMahon agreed to let Bret drop the title somewhere else, not in Montreal, as a way to preserve dignity on both sides. And then, on the night of Survivor Series in Montreal, everything got twisted in the most ruthless way possible. The sharpshooter gets locked in. The bell rings. The crowd erupts. And Bret, stunned, furious, spits in McMahon's face. No long explanation needed. That chain of images says, betrayal, loud enough. But what gets mentioned less is the aftershock that slammed into everyone left standing in the Hart Foundation. Owen Hart, the British Bulldog, and Jim Neidhart suddenly found themselves at a crossroads. Their family and friend had just been publicly humiliated after 14 years of service, and they had to ask themselves whether they were next. To them, this wasn't just about a belt. It was a cold display of power. I can do it because I want to. And if the company was willing to flip the script on Bret in front of tens of thousands of people, how much trust did Bulldog and Neidhart have left? So they did the most natural thing. They asked for their contracts to be ended, asked to leave before the toxic air hanging over the locker room could crush them too. Bulldog and Neidhart were eventually allowed to go, but of course, nothing was going to be truly clean. Neidhart still had to endure a stretch of televised humiliation, a reminder that leaving doesn't mean you'll be treated with respect. Owen wasn't as lucky. McMahon refused to release him, kept him under contract like a piece on a board, no matter how trapped he felt. And that's what makes this story bitter. They weren't necessarily bullied in the daily, obvious, threats-in-your-face way, but the way it all ended exposed a simple truth. Their value, as employees, was painfully thin. When loyalty gets answered with coldness, sometimes walking away is the only way to save your self-respect. Number 10. Amy Weber. Amy Weber's story is the kind that makes you realize WWE doesn't always need to fire you. Sometimes they just drop you into the right environment and let locker room culture finish the job. In 2004, Weber came out of the Diva search in 4th place, not the winner, but visible enough to get signed. She was moved straight onto SmackDown and placed into JBL's cabinet at a time when he was WWE champion. On paper, it sounded polished, the champion's image consultant. In reality, it put her right next to a group with power, influence, and, most importantly, a habit of treating other people's boundaries like a joke. The first major incident arrived in a dirty but familiar form. In the locker room, copies of flyers promoting a strip club where Weber had previously appeared started getting passed around. Not to inform anyone, just to mock her. And the detail that matters is this: JBL was among the people involved in spreading it. A thin piece of paper, but more than enough to turn her into a target. The kind of target everyone feels entitled to comment on, laugh at, and joke about because it's easier than acting like an adult. Then Weber got injured during training. In a normal workplace, an injury is an occupational risk. Here, it became ammo. Some wrestlers criticized her for being weak, as if pain were a personal failure instead of part of the job. And if you think it stopped there, it didn't. On a flight, Weber was in so much pain that she had to lie down across a row of empty seats just to get through it. And at the moment she was most vulnerable, 2 unnamed wrestlers poured an unknown liquid on her. Whatever it was, the action said enough. This wasn't harmless messing around. This was humiliation, on purpose. After that moment, Weber walked away from WWE for good. The way she described it sounded like a verdict. The atmosphere felt like a frat house, a place where degrading someone else becomes group entertainment. And sometimes you don't leave because you can't handle the work. You leave because you refuse to stay somewhere that treats basic respect like a luxury. Number 9. René Duprée. René Duprée wasn't some never-had-a-chance talent. He had the look, the star quality, and a position that could have grown into something real with the right guidance. But WWE is a place where you're not only fighting opponents in the ring, you're also trying to survive the locker room. Yes, Dupree had his own issues, especially addiction, and that affected his performance and discipline. But that doesn't explain being pushed to the point of leaving. It only made him easier to exploit. According to Dupree, JBL turned his life into hell through prolonged verbal abuse, including repeated slurs and digs aimed at his sexuality. Not a one-time blow-up, more like a routine, a habit, a way of checking a younger guy by reminding him he lived at the bottom of the food chain. And once an environment lets one person do that, everyone else reads it as a green light. Bob Holly is the other example. It started with something that should have been paperwork, a traffic ticket tied to a rental car that ended up in Holly's name. In a normal setting, that gets fixed with a few calls. Here, it became an excuse to unload rage. Holly's solution wasn't conversation, it was violence, including a heavy chair shot straight to Dupree's head, the kind of thing that can wreck a young career in seconds. By 2007, after years of dealing with it, Dupree said he'd suffered dozens of concussions and a long stretch of misery. Eventually, he asked to be released, and this time, WWE agreed. It looks peaceful on paper. In reality, it reads like an escape from a place where bullying gets wrapped up and sold as culture. Number 8. Daniel Puder. Tough Enough in late 2004 was packaged as a life-changing dream, but if you looked closer, it often played more like a pressure cooker where the entertainment came from humiliating contestants as much as building them. You weren't on TV just to prove yourself. You were there to absorb tests, snide comments, and public checks meant to put you in your place. And things truly ignited the moment Kurt Angle started challenging the trainees to amateur-style wrestling. First it was Chris Naraki. Then Angle turned to the rest and tossed out an invitation that sounded like a game. If anyone wanted a shoot, a real match, step up. Daniel Puder stepped up. And unlike people who only had athleticism or nerve, Puder had legitimate MMA experience, real grappling, and, most importantly, he wasn't there to play along. Within seconds, Puder wrapped Angle into a tight arm lock. The room's temperature changed instantly, because everyone understood what that meant. If it kept going, the price wasn't points for the show. It was an arm that could snap on live television. Referee Jim Corderas then counted a highly controversial 3 count to end it, cutting the moment off, protecting Angle's image, and maybe protecting his joints, too. But Puder's crime was already logged. He made a top star look like he was about to lose in something real. From that point on, Puder became the guy the locker room didn't want. He got labeled out of line, disrespectful, as if defending yourself and using your actual skill set was some kind of insult. His first major spotlight after winning the competition came at the Royal Rumble, and it felt less like a debut and more like a bill coming due. Puder took brutally stiff chops and heavy shots from Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero, and, of course, Bob Holly before he was eliminated. When his one-year deal ended, WWE offered him a lowball path to Deep South Wrestling. Puder declined. And that's how it closed, not because he lacked ability, but because he brushed the biggest taboo of all, making someone important look vulnerable. Number 7. Palmer Cannon. Palmer Cannon was the kind of figure WWE sometimes brought in as a TV side dish. Not exactly a wrestler, not yet a star, but a corporate-facing presence, a network guy written into storylines to orbit bigger names. It sounds like a door into the business. In reality, it can feel like walking into a room where the rules were written before you arrived. Who's allowed to belong, and who's just taking up space. Cannon's run in the company lasted only about 6 months. The cruel part is that it ended before he ever got a real, televised main roster match. No wins or losses for fans to remember. No highlight reel to cling to. Just a sudden turn so sharp it left people asking what happened backstage for everything to collapse that fast. The answer, as the story goes, sits in a stop in Italy during a European tour. Cannon decided to leave, without negotiating, without taking time off, without the polite version. He left in the literal sense, packed his things, gathered his luggage, and left only his ring gear lying on the bed like a cold period at the end of a sentence. Then he booked his own flight and went home. No announcement. No respectful farewell. Just the feeling of someone sprinting out of a place he knew he couldn't win inside. Cannon said the reason he walked was bullying from Chris Benoit and JBL. And in later retellings, Mr. Kennedy among them, the disturbing part wasn't just that a new guy got shoved aside. It was the attitude, no guilt, no hesitation. Benoit was described as saying, in essence, that some people don't belong in this business, and the way he looked at Kanyon made it feel personal, like Kanyon's very presence was an offense. So Kanyon's WWE story ended in the worst way, not defeated on screen, but crushed off screen. And what's left for people to remember, sadly, is that odd pirate intro segment with Paul Burkill. Funny on the surface, bitter underneath, because it captures the truth. Sometimes you're just a prop, and once the story doesn't need you, you get tossed. Number 6. Ivelisse Velez. Ultimate Warrior. ECW. NWO. WWE has a strange obsession with revivals nobody truly needs, then selling them as must-see events to pull viewers back in. In 2011, they followed that playbook by bringing back Tough Enough, a show dressed up as dream chasing, but often built as a psychological grind and a display of authority. Ivelisse Velez entered as a contestant, hungry, ambitious, and tough enough to endure being judged down to the smallest breath. But a leg injury cut her run short, knocking her out before she could fully show what she had. You'd think that would be the end. It wasn't. WWE still signed Velez to a developmental deal and sent her to FCW, like they were saying, we still see something. For a lot of people, that would sound like a second chance, fall down, get back up. Then reality hit. Just a year later, Velez was released. Fast, clean, cold. And what made the story more toxic than simply being cut was what she said afterward. She believed she was pushed out because she was among the early voices willing to speak up about Bill DeMott, a coach in the developmental system, over alleged bullying. This wasn't framed as a random whisper to her. In the eyes of many, DeMott had long been viewed as a dark cloud hanging over the system, a heavy presence that created an atmosphere where survival meant learning to stay quiet. The accusations later attached to him read like a list of what should never exist in any workplace. Racist remarks, homophobic slurs, sexual jokes turned into culture, and behavior described as physically aggressive or intimidating. DeMott ultimately resigned and left WWE in March 2015, but the stretch before that was long enough to leave damage. Velez, like other trainees, was pulled into that environment. And the key point is what happened when she said, no. When she complained, when she named what felt wrong, the cost didn't immediately land on the person being accused. It landed on her career. That's the darkest lesson in systems like this. The first person to pay isn't always the person who's wrong, it's the person who speaks. And when a young talent learns their future can be cut off for telling the truth, you understand why bullying in WWE isn't only an individual act. It becomes a mechanism, kept alive by silence. Number 5. Vader. Vader didn't walk into WWE as some nobody begging for a shot. He arrived with the reputation of a real monster, an established star respected by critics and fans long before he ever set foot in the company. And that's exactly why his WWE run hurts to look back on, not because Vader wasn't good enough, but because the system seemed determined to snap the aura he brought with him. His first major WWE feud was with Shawn Michaels, built toward a big match at SummerSlam 1996. On paper, it should have been perfect, a wrecking ball heavyweight colliding with a champion who mastered technique and showmanship. Behind the curtain, though, the story sounded very different. Michaels was widely said to dislike Vader, accusing him of working too stiff, hitting hard, colliding for real, making opponents pay more than they wanted to. The thing is, in wrestling, stiff can be a style. But when the complaint is coming from mid-90s HBK, someone long associated with ego and backstage bullying, that complaint stops being feedback and turns into a weapon. The story goes that Michaels pulled Vader aside and tore into him, not just critiquing his work, but threatening him outright. If Vader didn't lighten up, HBK could get him fired and wreck his career. That kind of line doesn't need fists to choke the air out of a room, because it targets what everyone fears most, your paycheck and your future. Vader reportedly panicked, imagined losing his job, and broke down in tears. And that's the bitter twist, a man built like a tank, someone who could swallow you whole in the ring, getting flattened by power and politics. And it didn't soften over time. If anything, the picture got clearer. Vince McMahon didn't seem interested in presenting Vader as a true force. He seemed to enjoy watching him get cut down. Vader was made to insult himself on TV with crude, degrading lines, like self-humiliation was the price of airtime. On top of that, Vince even complained about body odor among employees during an AOL live chat, pure 90s energy, where disrespect could be served as public entertainment. Eventually, Vader asked out and left WWE. He went back to Japan, and once again proved what people already knew. The issue was never Vader's ability. The issue was that WWE chose to turn a legend into a punchline, and then acted surprised when that legend refused to keep playing the clown forever. Number 4. Jim Ross. Plenty of people in WWE have dealt with bullying, but very few have been hit in front of the audience on live television with an enthusiasm that felt almost gleeful, like Jim Ross. And what makes this story both strange and unsettling is that the person behind it wasn't some ambitious undercard guy trying to act tough in the locker room. It was Vince McMahon himself. The boss seemed to find a particular kind of enjoyment in humiliating his own lead announcer over and over. In other words, JR didn't just have to do his job, he had to survive being used as a prop for vicious jokes. If you tried to list every degrading moment Ross was put through, you could build an entire video out of it. But a few scenes capture the cruelty of that power game. McMahon mocked Ross's Bell's palsy on television, turning a medical condition into a punchline. Then there was the moment in Ross's hometown of Oklahoma City, where Vince shoved Ross's face into his own bare backside, an act that wasn't just vulgar, but openly designed to assert who held the power. And the low point for many was the Dr. Chyna skit, where Ross was made the butt of the joke not long after surgery for colon cancer. That wasn't comedy. That was callousness packaged as entertainment. The brutal part is that Ross stayed for a long time anyway. Maybe because he loved the craft. Maybe because he understood his role. Maybe because in places like that, you convince yourself you can just endure a little longer and it'll pass. JR's WWE run didn't officially end until 2013. While he was moderating a promotional panel for WWE 2K14, things went off the rails, and Ross became the one left holding the blame for what should have been a shared responsibility. He was fired, even if the public story got smoothed into something closer to a retirement to keep it clean. Ross did return in later years in limited roles, but the imprint never really goes away. A microphone legend who didn't leave because he stopped mattering. He left because he'd been used until it felt like there was nothing left to take. Number 3. Chyna. Chyna was the kind of person who could change an entire arena's rhythm the moment she walked out. Not because she fit some recycled, sexy template, but because she carried herself like a living challenge. Muscle, presence, and a stance that flat out said, "I don't need anyone's permission to exist here." When the crowd called her the ninth wonder of the world, it wasn't a cute nickname. It was an admission that Chyna didn't belong inside the box this industry was used to forcing onto women. But that same difference also made her a target. And with Chyna, the bullying didn't have to look like shouting or shoving. It was more surgical than that. The way people adjusted the spotlight. On TV, she could be used as a clean shock moment, a weapon to make the audience gasp. Behind the curtain, what Chyna wanted was serious recognition, respect as a real star, not a powerful splash of color you place next to someone else so the shot looks bigger. Then the story veered into the thing that made it even more toxic: backstage relationships. Anyone who followed that era has heard the legend of a love triangle connected to Chyna. One side being her, one side being the man who had been with her for years, and the third being a name with real weight inside the company's power structure. Whether you see it as a broken relationship or cold politics, the outcome reads the same. From that point on, Chyna didn't just lose a person, she started losing her position. And the scary part is, in WWE, nobody has to announce, "I'm taking her out." They can make you understand it through doors that quietly start closing. Opportunities tightened without explanation. Long-term plans faded like a screen-losing signal. Important conversations happened, and you weren't invited anymore. Not because Chyna stopped being valuable, because she became an issue in a story the company wanted cleaned up and put away. When feelings crash into leverage, the one who pays usually isn't the one holding the leverage. The sharpest truth is that Chyna didn't leave feeling like she was finished. She left feeling pushed away from the very legacy she helped build. And that's exactly why her story fits the theme of being bullied. Sometimes bullying doesn't need violence. It only needs to make you doubt yourself, to make you understand that you can break as many molds as you want, as long as you don't touch what the system has decided is off-limits. Chyna entered WWE as a barrier breaker. She left as a chilling reminder that in a power game, accomplishments don't always save you, but the wrong relationship at the wrong time can sink everything. Number 2. Kanyon. Chris Kanyon was the kind of wrestler that people who really watch the craft recognize instantly. His mind moved faster than his gear. He had the creativity of someone always building a new way to tell a story, the smoothness to make difficult offense look effortless, and the kind of energy that made you believe he could play any role. Comedy, villain, underdog, whatever you needed. The problem is, WWE doesn't only hire talented people. WWE hires people who fit. And with Kanyon, that mold always felt like it was tightening. In the stories told about his time there, the haunting part isn't one obvious, blatant beatdown. It's the feeling of being treated like an outsider. You can exist on the show, but never truly belong in the locker room. You can deliver, but still get that look that says, yeah, and what else? Kanyon had personality, and in an environment that prefers uniformity, personality can get treated like a threat. What makes Kanyon's story heavier is the human side of who he was outside the ring. Later, accounts connected to him described a sense that he was treated differently, mocked, and targeted with jokes that weren't really jokes. More like dull blades, cutting again and again. You don't have to buy every detail to understand the mechanism. When a locker room treats someone's vulnerability as entertainment, the person who's different becomes the easiest target. And if you don't have power as a shield, you get worn down by 1,000 small scratches. Kanyon also ended up in situations where it became hard to tell what was creative and what was humiliation. Roles that felt like the company saying, "We can turn you into anything we want, just don't ever think you get to be taken seriously." For someone who lives on professional pride, that kind of treatment kills motivation faster than injury. You don't just lose opportunities. You lose the feeling of safety when you walk into work. And when Kanyon left WWE, it didn't land like some big farewell. It felt like a quiet disappearance, the kind of silence you get when a system wants everything to move on without anyone asking, why? But that silence is exactly what's scary, because it shows you don't always get pushed out with paperwork. Sometimes they just make you believe you no longer have a place to stand. Kanyon had skill, presence, and creativity. What he lacked wasn't talent. What he lacked was an environment that treated a person like a person, not a test subject for how poisonous locker room culture could be. Number 1. Justin Roberts. In WWE, you can do everything right. Hit your cues, pronounce every name clean, keep the rhythm of an entire segment steady, and still get treated like a piece of equipment in the locker room. Justin Roberts was that kind of person. He didn't need championships to be remembered. All he had to do was pick up a microphone and deliver one line, and the whole arena would explode. But behind the cheers, a ring announcer's job sits in one of the easiest places to dismiss. Useful when they need you, disposable when they don't. In what Roberts later shared, he dealt with a long stretch of toxic atmosphere where respect didn't come from professionalism. It came from whose side you were on. Instead of visible hits, it was the slow, repetitive kind of humiliation. Little cutting remarks said in front of others, looks that treated you like a joke, situations set up to embarrass you just to remind you that you weren't allowed to react. The scary part is that this kind of bullying rarely needs shouting. It only needs to happen often enough that you walk into an arena feeling like you're stepping through a minefield. And this is the part that deserves to be stated correctly. Those experiences weren't necessarily the only reason Roberts left WWE. In a massive company, contracts change, directions shift, roles get reshuffled, those realities are always there. But the build-up of an environment like that is what wears you down, until the day the door finally closes and people understand why he chose to tell the story in a more blunt, unfiltered way. Those things weren't necessarily the only reason Justin Roberts left WWE, but they were enough to turn the backstage area into a place you wouldn't want to survive for one more day. And those are the names who ended up leaving WWE because of the darker side behind the curtain. Which story hit you the hardest? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe to Wrestling Sphere, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next Can't Miss Backstage countdowns.